Hi, it's Therese and I'm here for AlanHutson.com, and I have two Christmas Amaryllis cards to share using stamps from the August 2019 release. So both of my cards are using the same stamp sets, and I'm using the new beautiful Mondo Amaryllis image, and this set comes with some really pretty fonts as well as a large floral design. I am going to be stamping and colouring these cards quite differently, so you're going to get two totally different looks using the same stamp sets. And starting with some Prismacolor pencils today. I've stamped out the image using my Misty, and that's for two reasons. One, because it's a large stamp and the original size Misty gives me a really big platform to work on, and I know that the photopolymer stamp's going to adhere well to that lid, and I can stamp it wherever I want on my cardstock. I used some oyster grey cardstock, so it's a nice pale grey colour, and I did actually add a layer of white Prismacolor pencil below my coloured pencils. In retrospect, it probably didn't make much difference. I just sort of do this as a habit when I'm working on coloured cardstock, but if you're not sure what your pencils are going to look like, it's a good idea to have a piece of the same coloured cardstock off to the side from where you're working, and then you can actually see what the colours are going to look like as you colour them on the different papers or cardstocks, because it does change it up, and that'll just make it more true to the colour that you want. And I just like adding the layer of white, and you might see here that my white pencil is quite short, so I'm using a pencil extender, which is a really handy tool, and this is one that I got from an art shop, but I know that Prismacolor actually have their own version, and the Alan Hutson have them as well in their store. So it's an inexpensive but great tool to use to get more from your pencils, because you can use them right to the end. You're not wasting anything, which is great. Alright, originally I was going to go for a bit of a lighter colour on these flowers. I have used this is like some pale yellows and oranges here, but as I was colouring it, I just decided to add extra layers, and that's the good thing I like about Prismacolor pencils, is that if you don't colour too hard on the cardstock, if you colour nice and softly, you can keep adding layers and layers and layers of colour until you're actually happy. I think happy with the final effect, because pencils are very forgiving in that respect, and you can always come back and add more as long as you haven't pushed too hard on your pencil and filled up the tooth of the paper. And another great thing about Prismacolor pencils is that you can add different colours on top. So you might have noticed I was using the yellows and the oranges, but then I actually came in with like quite a brown colour and added some shadows and shading with the brown. And now what I'm doing here is coming in with the espresso and adding some shadows and shading with that as well. And I think that just really, by adding that darker colour, it really takes it over the edge. I didn't show the colouring of all the flowers here because I actually did colour them very much the same. I did just leave a portion of the stem on my cardstock because I thought the green would help it pop, and I've done this whole focus my image just in one corner of the card, and I love this effect on a fairly clean and simple card, and it just makes the flower the main focal image here. And I'm actually using the espresso here to add shading again to the stem and leaves. And this is another reason, the other reason why I used my Misty. I can actually come in and restamp my image over top again, and I am using the Obsidian pigment ink. It's the black ink from Altenew. It's a really nice crisp dark ink, and that just added those details back in after I'd been colouring with the pencils. Here's another trick that I use. I have a sentiment I want to use. It's from a set called the Retro Holiday Greetings, and it's another stamp set from the release in August 2019. And I've just stamped the sentiment on a piece of acetate, and then I can just move it around my panel until I'm happy with the placement. If I'm not sure where I want the sentiment to be, this just is a great way for me to see what it's actually going to look like, where it's going to be on the card front. So I don't have to commit and I can make my choices before I actually commit with the MISTI, which is what I did there. I came in and stamped it just over the edge of one of the flowers. I'm adding a piece of black cardstock just in the top left hand corner of my design. This is a top fold portrait card, and then I just popped up my panel with some fun foam and added a couple of sequins. I use a matte medium here and some tweezers, and I know that matte medium has a real strong hold and those sequins aren't going to go anywhere. Well, that's once I get them in place. And I really liked the subtle look of this card, and that black border, that partial black border, really helped to pop the sentiment, I thought. So I'm on to my second card now, and this time it's going to be quite a busy card compared to the first one. I'm stamping out the Amaryllis image 3 times on some Bristol Smooth cardstock with some Versa Mark ink, adding some white embossing powder and then heat setting that. And this is just going to help me. I'm going to be doing some watercolor brush marker coloring, and by having a heat embossed image, the watercoloring actually goes a lot faster. I don't have to wait for all the areas to dry individually before I can come in and paint them again. I can use the edges of the embossing, kind of creates a well, and that means I can actually paint a lot quicker. So these are the Altenew watercolor brush markers, and I'm using them direct to paper. So by having them undiluted, it makes them really bright, and that's such a fun thing to do on a Christmas card. I've got a couple of different colors and I'm actually mixing them on the paper. I find they work really well on the Bristol Smooth cardstock, and as long as I don't try and work in too big an area at a time, I find they blend really easily. I'm adding my darker colours towards the inner portions of the petals and then blending it out with the lighter red and just working that way. And if I do go outside the lines accidentally, I'm just coming in with a wet brush and actually using some clean water and then dabbing that away. I find the red is very unforgiving. So if you do go over the edges, then you want to get onto that straight away because it doesn't like to move once it's actually dry. And you can see in the center of this flower here, I did accidentally put some color in the wrong spot, and I lifted that up. And before I added the actual center color of the flower, I waited for it to dry, and that seemed to work really well. This process with the watercolor brush markers is definitely much quicker than using the Prismacolor pencils, although I did have to color this flower 3 times, and it was worth it. I think the card turned out really pretty. It is a very bright card though, and quite a busy card too. So once these petals had dried, I actually did come in with I think it's the Lava Rock color, and I'm using a fairly dry brush here just to add some simple shading on the petals, and I think that made all the difference here. It took that sort of cartoony brightness away and added a bit of, I don't know, it's lifelike as a flower can get when it's done on Bristol Smooth cardstock and white heat embossing and bright colours. I think the shading did actually make it look much nicer. Alright, so I did use the coordinating die cuts here to cut these flowers out, and I did keep the pieces of the leaves because I wasn't sure if I was going to add some into the finished card or not. So this is the card base that I'm working on here, and I decided to add sort of a pattern on the edge of the card using the Amaryllis and some obsidian black ink. I have folded the card over and just used some adhesive in the center just to temporarily adhere that. And I actually really like how that pattern looks, even as it is. So I wanted to pop all of these flowers up on the front of my card, and to do that I thought it'd be easy just to join them together, and I'm using some double-sided adhesive to do that, and then adding some foam squares behind. And I thought this way I can kind of set my flowers out how I want before I commit. I've got a piece of the oyster grey cardstock here again, and I'm adding another sentiment. This is also from the Retro Holidays Greetings set, and I wasn't very organised here, but I did decide to stamp it out on the front of my card. And because it's a pigment ink, it was slow drying, and it did give me a bit of time to get my card piece all set up in the right place before I stamped it, because it took me a few seconds. I've added the floral design to pop that up on the front of this panel, and then I can just flip the card panel over and cut away the edges, and I really like how that turned out. And I just did decide to add a couple of leaves here, and I popped up those as well, added some fun foam behind my panel, and then adhered that to the front of my card, and then decided to come in with some of the snowball droplets, and I added a few of these across the front of my card with some matte medium. I hope you're inspired to try some Christmas floral designs, and don't forget, all the links to the Alan Hutson classroom and where you'll find all the products and everything that I've used is going to be in the description below. Thanks so much for joining me. Bye.